Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight, and I hope you'll stick around for our panel discussion, which we're going to start right now. So I'd like to invite up Scott Fitzgerald, the head of interactive media here at New York University, Abu Dhabi, and he'll introduce the rest of the panel.
Yeah, my name's Scott Fitzgerald. I'm art professor, assistant art professor here at New York University, Abu Dhabi. We've got 3 artists who are either showed work during this presentation, or will be showing shortly after, or have work in the gallery across the way in the Arts Center. And the topic of this is futures. Everybody's work is really diverse and different, so I figure we'll just sort of have a conversation after they all introduce themselves and see where we kind of go from that. This feels kind of like a beauty pageant where everybody's going to come up down the aisle. I don't know if you all want to, if the 3 of you want to come up right now and I can introduce you, or if you want to do this one by one. I'll start with Mark Farid. He's an artist who is doing a project called Seeing Eye in collaboration with Nimrod Vardi and John Engel. And you, please come on up. And he'll talk about his work in just a moment. We also have Louise Hooper, who's a film director. Her documentary, When Bjork Met Attenborough, is going to be showing right after this panel, so please stick around. And we've also got Luis Nieto, is that okay? Whose work you just saw, the examination of meta cinema on the back of a cat, and also has a very nice piece over in the art gallery with a mouse synthesizer. So I think what we'll do is Mark, if you want to start, and we can do.
I'm going to start.
Oh, you want to start? Okay, all right, great.
Not because I'm being bossy. It's just that's the way it's been organised.
Okay.
I think. So just to say, it's great to be here, and I thought those films are fantastic. Are there any filmmakers here that made the short films? No, but they were superb. I thought really high quality and very funny with the mouse.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. And if you haven't seen the mouse, you must go and see. They're really great. So I don't make science fiction films. I make documentaries based on art and science today. But as you can see, it's really just about the human condition. So science fiction is about us and how we adapt to our changing world. So I've just got a few quick thoughts about it, just to introduce myself. Art and science are inextricably linked. So let's see if this works. Okay, so love and sex, as we all know, it's all to do with art and science. So when we fall in love, it's intoxicating, it's bewitching, but of course underneath that, we're just pulsating hormones and pleasure receptors. When we look at nature, or we have juicy, delicious food that we have here in a tropical place, of course, it all belies the beauty of mathematics, Fibonacci patterns, as I'm sure you're all aware of. So the whole time, it's just science and nature. And we saw that fantastic, incredible film, which felt like sci-fi, but of course was real, with the Da Vinci internal organs. Absolutely incredible. So science and art have always been closely connected. What I do as a documentary maker is I scratch the surface on what makes people create. What is this impulse that makes us want to express ourselves? And whether it's psychology or biology or whatever it is, to try and understand that, and through that to try and express to my audience the different patterns that we go through to make art. So I've made many crazy films. Salvador Dali, the most fantastic surrealist ever. And the reason I think he was such a great artist, and what one of my films shows, is that he had an inextricable passion to always understand what was happening. So whether it's Freud, or whether it was the double helix being discovered with DNA, or whether it was particle physics, he would use that and put that into his art. And I think you can only be a great artist and a great human being if you understand what's happening around you through science and the brain and the body. So even I made another crazy film about a crazy person, Houdini, and about magic. And he inspired great awe in the audiences of 1920s America. And the reason he did that was because he had sort of superhuman strength. And of course, this wasn't make-believe, it was real. And he did that by understanding the physical body to such an extent, he knew how every night he could perform the water torture trick by understanding how much carbon dioxide could go into his body before he would actually stop breathing. And he knew how to play that. And so his magic was actually understanding physics and understanding his body. This is a guy called Tom Dykhoff. I made a film called The Secret Life of Buildings, which was an interesting 3-part series for Channel 4 in the UK, looking at home and work and play, and seeing how our behaviour and our minds and our bodies are affected by our environment. So we did a few experiments to see what would happen to this guy, Tom Dykhoff, if he had no light. So I'm sure you know your eyes see things around you, they're very helpful, but also they take receptors of blue light and different cones of light, and they regulate your body clock. So what happens is, sometimes, unfortunately, people, building contractors, they think, we'll have small windows because brick's cheaper than glass. And we'll have really small windows, but that's fine, you don't need much light. But actually, what we did is this experiment where for 1 week, we kept the presenter inside his house at a very, very low lux level. And what happened, he did glucose and urine samples, and at the end of it, we realized that he was borderline diabetic. His body clock was just shifting, and I'm sure you guys know that that will effectively suppress your immune system, and in time can cause cancers and different disease. So small little things like light and not understanding your environment can affect you deeply. So what I've understood from making films for like 15, almost 20 years, I'm ashamed to say, that all humans, we are a very fantastic, incredible, wonderful species, but we're incredibly arrogant because we think that with the alarm clock and the coffee machine that we can just get up and do what we like and we can impose ourselves on nature. But we're animals, incredible animals, clever, beautiful, wonderful animals. But if we don't remember these things around us and how we get affected by our environment through science and through neuroscience and through biology and through physics, we will not be able to live in this world. So as science fiction shows, technology is racing ahead. And if we don't understand where we came from, the kind of primordial soup, and understand that we're still animals trying to react, that we're going to mess things up. So this is another thing from the film, that you can now obviously have 3D visualizations of architecture, and this is actually a hospital scene. So you can understand different sight lines and understand what the best way is to make architecture to have the best results. So that's it. I would just say, for a beautiful life and a beautiful world, we need art and science together.
So I'm going to do this a slightly different way, and we've made a trailer, which is going to kind of explain the project.
In this playground of immortality, the preservation of experience has taken hold of our existence. We're able to stay connected even when hiding from one another. The illusion of companionship without the demands of relationships. We choose to text rather than talk. Where we are but simulations, we cannot be ourselves. These simulations blur the lines between fiction and reality. And when they permeate back into our lives, they obscure the sense of ourselves and of one another. Where both spectator and spectacle inhabit this blurred reality, eroding individuality and the sanctity of consciousness. Because we've grown up with technology, we assume technology has grown up too. We're being isolated as it continues to progress. And as we've never been taught how to be alone, we only know how to be lonely. The distinction between physical reality and its simulation is blurring. And if our consciousness is experienced through the perception of sight and sound, through interaction, through technology, and through our conception of knowledge, to what extent is it really our own?
Okay, so following on quite nicely, the premise of the project is for 28 days, I will wear a virtual reality headset through which I will only see and hear what someone else is seeing and hearing. That other person will be wearing a pair of glasses which have 3 lenses built into them and 2 microphones. So they're concealed so no one will know that it's being filmed. And I will experience that as that will be the only thing that I'm seeing and hearing. So I'll be living through someone else's shoes. That other person, I don't know who they are, what they look like, what profession they have, what their interests are, how funny they are, nothing except for they're over the age of 21, they're a heterosexual male, and they're in a relationship. And following on quite nicely, actually, the premise of it is to see, how technology is developing will act as a mediator to our experiences, and the potential for that to evolve in the future, as well as, within our surroundings where we are, the fact that how we experience the world comes down to, ultimately, I believe anyway, sight and sound. That if you lose any other sense, you can function relatively well within society. I can't smell very well, but you don't know that until I tell you. But if you're immersed in someone else's shoes for long enough, if you're only experiencing something else, how will that start to affect the human psyche and who you are? And is there something inherent about the individual that is there, or will a cultural identity, that we maybe all have, supersede that? And ultimately, that's what it's trying to test. So slightly different to everyone else's, the fact that we haven't actually done this project yet. We're still in the case of trying to source funding for it. But the way that the project works is that I will be in a gallery space for 28 days, for 24 hours a day, where everyone is welcome to come and see me. And there'll be talks going on at the front. And then ultimately, the project is to make a documentary at the end of it, which will kind of reveal what's going on. So we're currently talking to neuroscientists, brain plasticians, psychologists, and others. And we, if anyone else wants to do research, everyone's more than welcome to, into what happens, and that will feature within the documentary as well as in the talks that go on. I think that's kind of it.
You have?
I don't have any slide.
Okay, I'll turn this on.
Yeah, so my name is Nieto. I'm an artist. I'm interested also in science. But at the contrary, at Dali, I'm talking about blind and light and eyes. I kind of compare me like a fake blind, pretending to be blind, and looking for something. But and then when I find something interesting, I just try, and then I stop just before I understand. Because for me, that's why for me that makes me not being a scientist, because I don't want to understand how things work. Because at that point, I think that the poetry is broken already. When you understand how does it work. And yeah, I don't know if do you have something else to add?
I just wasn't sure if you had some sort of nice presentation prepared. But no, right. I mean, you're a nice enough person to begin with. So it's funny that I mean, you both sort of spoke, and all 3 of you actually spoke about this thing that I wrote down, like before we even sat down, which is sort of like, and this is a question of my own and something that I'm constantly engaging in with my own work and in my teaching. It's like, all 3 of you are engaged in some way in using technology in your work, whether it's documenting the use of it or observing how it affects people or using it in creation of media and artifacts or sort of like experiencing it. But how do these, how do these new technologies transform like the nature of art, the nature of our experiencing it? I think that there's a sort of a moment in time right now where, with the introduction of digital tools that really allow us to put things together in ways that we really haven't been able to before, we're able to sort of realize things in a new capacity. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are and how this sort of like, how this can sort of change our understanding of it.
The way that I see it is, it definitely has the potential to affect and influence the way that we're experiencing art, but it isn't necessarily, you know, that's what you're choosing your focus to be in. It's, you know, painting, for example. I don't necessarily see painting as art just because you're using that medium. That isn't by default the definition. I think that it's how you choose to use it and how you choose for the viewer to interact with it. The capacity of, not even the capacity, it's what your concept really is and why you're doing it that I think, which is what makes it art or not. So I don't think it should necessarily be that limited to just that in which it encompasses, I would say.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's a common thing that I see in a lot of sort of like new media art and things like that, where people become really fixated and focused on like the how, you know, as opposed to the why. So like you're saying like, you know, the idea of a paintbrush as a tool. And people are sort of like, get really wrapped up in the like, you know, how did you make the mouse squeak, right, when I press the key? As opposed to like, you know, why did you go and choose a mouse, right? And I think that, you know, in any sort of medium, that's sort of like, that's really true. You know, the idea is the important thing there, and not necessarily like how you do it. But I still think that there's something like, you know, really interesting about how we can suddenly engage in these modes of production that are different than before. And you were talking actually specifically, Mark, about sort of you talking about engaging the world through sight and sound. But you know, in the video with the Da Vinci video that we watched, you know, the most compelling part of that to me was the haptic aspect of it. And I mean, I could have watched, I probably could have done without some of the surgery footage, but, you know, I definitely could have watched just, you know, the surgeon and sort of the almost dance of their hands interacting with that machine for, I mean, I could have watched that all day long. I thought that was really beautiful. And I think that that's, so I think that there's, you know, what you were talking about is this sort of like, I don't know, in some ways I think of it as almost like a traditional, almost passive sort of way, where even though you're immersing yourself, it's still, you aren't getting like a physical input or interface into it.
But it's in the same way that you were experiencing that was through the sights. And every experience that we have, although it is touch, that, you know, that's the thing that brings you back into the real world, I think. But we base everything upon these two senses, and what is who we are, I think, comes down to the memories and the way that we experience those two senses, and smell, of course. But, you know, it's without senses, we're numb to the world, and we are just enlightened, possibly, I don't know. But if you void yourself of those senses, it becomes a completely different reality that we live in, and it almost becomes yours to make it, and how you interact with it and understand it. But with only those, using these two senses, I don't think you can make the world how you want it to be, in a world where everything is designed and made. And you walk down the street, and in London we have square gardens and a tree planted in a specific place, but man did that. You go to the park, and that isn't nature, that's something that man's created. You go to the countryside, to these rolling hills, and that's man again. None of these things exist outside of it. So that idea that we're constantly reacting to our environment and we're behaving in a particular way, that is dictated ultimately by the experience of sight and sound.
In answer to your question before, I think I'm a bit of an old school Luddite in the sense that I feel I've been making films for such a long time, so I've seen it's gone from like, you know, big Betacam to this and this to that, you know, all these different things. And in the end, who cares what it's on? It doesn't matter. I mean, okay, the sound is easier, or, you know, the colours are better. It doesn't matter. So obviously, it's the story that's important, and the person, and whatever you're telling, the narrative. And I think the problem is sometimes I find that technology is exciting when things are happening, but like I was saying with DALL-E, he knew what was out there on his horizon, and he's like, that is curious, or I want to understand that, so let's play with that, and it brings out this new fusion of ideas. And he might not have the right paintbrush or the right thing, so he'll create something new. So he'll start doing, you know, molecular pictures because he doesn't know, has to find a new way to express it. So rather than technology being there to kind of liberate us, which it does, of course it does, you know, of course it makes it much easier to make films and to put them on YouTube and everything else. But I think the way that suddenly everyone goes to Instagram, or suddenly everyone goes to this, actually isn't causing creativity. It's just causing proliferation of the same. So I hope that's clear. What I'm trying to say is that technology is cool when it's out there, you're excited by it, and you find your own path to jump into. What isn't exciting is that when things just come and you go, okay, that's the new Apple, whatever, let's just use this to make my video, or this to do that. So I think the idea of technology always pushing creativity isn't right. You should be your brain that pushes it, for what it's worth.
Well, yeah, I think that a lot of times it's the sort of like subversion of what the intended use of of the technology or platform is that actually makes it really interesting. So Mark and I were talking earlier, and he, for those of you who don't know, he tried to use the crowdsource platform Kickstarter to gain funds to start his project so that he could try it. But the reality of it was he wound up, instead of using it as a funding platform, he actually used it more as a promotional tool to get exposure. I mean, is that a reasonable summation of what?
Yeah, along with John and Nimrod, the director and gallery creator. Yeah, it was, how do you get publicity for something and, raise awareness of it? So Kickstarter is the kind of obvious kind of means when you think about it, that it's a platform that is there, that is used for something else, but it does get a lot of media, and when something clicks, and, it really was, yeah, and I think it succeeded as far as we can say, but, we're still sourcing funding, so it didn't work that well, is how I'd say it goes.
I mean, and, like subversion, of sort of like the expected too really plays a lot into this as well. So, Lewis, in your sort of rodent synth, like you don't. That's when you first encounter it, you don't necessarily expect these bodies to swell and start to squeak and make noise. And in your, in the video that we saw, I don't think anybody really expected like, the fleas to kind of like rock out the way they did.
You were expecting an endoscopy inside the cat, right?
Yeah. Well, I think anything with cats is probably going to wind up being successful on screen these days. But again, like in your case, like you're using humor to sort of subvert these things, right? You've got this sort of dour look on your face, and the serious, even despite the sort of like bizarre surroundings that you had in yourself. But it's sort of that subversion and that unexpected sort of playfulness that I think that really made that work and makes your other piece work. Do you intentionally engage in that sort of like playing with people's expectations and?
No, at all. I mean, I can analyze a film or a performance that I did afterwards. But I never planned to do something or to create some reaction. But at the end, I can realize that every time is the same. So I kind of repeating myself.
Well, I mean, it's also really playful too, and like a ludic approach to technology is one that sort of like makes it much more palatable for people.
Yeah, totally. Well, you think what I'm doing is very technologic, but actually it's not. I'm good just doing very simple things in post-production, but I don't have any technology. I don't even have a smartphone, so it's. But that's the good thing about that technology, that it's a race of showing you the reality, like the Da Vinci thing, and even every time is the race to show you even better and better the reality, the HD screens and everything. And so you can be very close to the reality, but at the same time, it gave you the tool to fake the reality very easy. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And well, I mean, it's sort of like this, this sort of like, faking or sort of like pushing it, right? It gets back a little bit to what you were talking about. It's like, how do we make these human, right? How do we make this work human? And by sort of like pushing these tools in ways that they aren't expected to be used or intended to, we kind of bring it back to ourselves. And a lot of times I think that's the real challenge when we start to sort of think about what media can be, is how do we really humanize it? And in film, we've got a history of sort of like narrative, right? Stories and passing on tales, which is a very, innate thing that we have. But when we start to engage in sort of like novel ways of experiencing it, we need to find a novel way of sort of like bringing our own humanity into it. And I think that that's like a challenge that you've all kind of met in a lot of ways. Is it something that you, and any one of you, please, I mean, is it something that you think that you sort of like work towards in trying to sort of like bring a human aspect into these works, or do you think that it's just sort of part of your creative process?
I find it more, we tend to project that on it in its own right. It comes, maybe not intentionally, maybe it's not something that, you know, we always do that all the time, and, you know, lots of people name their phones, and even to that level of personalization, and that this need to make technology something that is intrinsically part of you, or that is humanized in that way. I'd say that I don't necessarily think it's about the work. I think it's something that we all do in everyday life, that coming from a deep insecurity, I'm sure, of some kind, and, you know, but I don't think, for me anyway, my work is about that side of stuff.
But you can't, I mean, nothing can be without human aspect. I mean, it's almost like tautological. I mean, it's impossible to do anything in film, or I think, I mean, that's a question I'd put to the floor. I mean, you cannot make anything which hasn't got a human aspect to it. I mean, Dali, for example, going back to the art, you know, you'd see something, there's that idea that you know, anthropomorphize. You know, you see something, you can't do anything that hasn't got a human feeling. So, I mean, is Boris here? I don't know, he did his wonderful thing with the mouse. I mean, straight away, you then start to feel your own personal feelings with that. Even if you see a color or a Roscoe, you know, you feel something about your own humanity and about ideas. I mean, the only way to process anything is that. So to me, it seems like, I don't know, crazy. I mean, everything has to be human, doesn't it?
There is Lars von Trier films.
Yeah, but I mean, they, you know, exactly. But can we do that? Can we? I put the question out there. Can we have science fiction without humans?
No, but I think it's a case more of the fact that just because humans have made it, humans have made everything. So that human thing will always exist in something that it's almost irrelevant to talk about.
Exactly, it's irrelevant to talk about, because otherwise, basically, the only way it cannot be is if it's viewed by a computer. But if it's viewed by a human, then that human aspect's going to be in it, isn't it?
I think. Well, I think
so.
that, you know.
I know, but it's like,
I mean, I mean, for me, it's, you know, it exists along some sort of continuum, right? As we develop things, sometimes there's things that have a little bit more personality, and we can anthropomorphize these things a little bit more, and we give more we imbibe more feeling into it, right? There's some works that really, truly move us deeply, that have a very human element to it. And then if you go to, you know, if we talk about pure science, there's certainly like the human element of like, okay, we've sort of like worked through these procedures in this process to discover these things, but there's nothing about the actual facts themselves that are particularly human. It's just the revealing of them that is. And so I think that there's some sort of like, you know, we can sort of like find somewhere like middle ground here, you know. That's how I.
but I think that's, for me, that's where that's science and that's art. And so science and art and the media, that's when they do cross over. And if there isn't a human aspect, then it is just going to be science.
Yeah. So okay. So so does anybody in the audience have questions for anyone on stage? Yeah.
Aaron Neville-Lovey at the Emirates College of Technology. Me about, microphone. Okay, can everybody hear? Oh, good. So, sorry, my back is to all of you. So one of the things that we discuss in our class is not just the human aspect of art, but what it does to humans. And the artist may be like, well, that's not my problem.
Yeah, that's
right?
interesting.
That's your problem. And one of the things we discuss in class is, well, you know, shouldn't we problematize that kind of attitude? So I just wondered, you know, if you had any thoughts about that.
There was a project, sorry, can I just jump in quickly? There was an art and neuroscience project where they tried to understand what is intrinsically good or interesting about art. So they get like Roscoe's and they've put transmitters on people's brains to try and understand, is this making you feel X or Y or Z? And if we know that, can we actually make art to fit you and to fit your mood? And for example, they did another experiment about like an emotive house. So your house becomes an artistic extension of your own, emotions and your minds and your behavior and your feeling. So you'll come back and you're feeling really angry. And so the house kind of opens up and gives you a bit more space. It's like, ooh, back off, So it becomes like an art representation of yourself. Or if you're feeling insecure and a bit lonely and a bit wobbly, the house kind of comes in like a big hug. And so you have like these soft walls and different colors and things. So there is a way that you could probably map what we need artistically around us and aesthetically. But I mean, that really is at the moment still science fiction. And the problem is then is who's controlling that and who's being controlled. But it's an interesting concept.
Hey.
Yes.
I'll answer in a minute.
Okay.
As society and problems that face it become more and more complex, and as machines become more and more intelligent, people will let machines make more and more of their decisions for them, simply because machine-made decisions will bring better results than man-made ones. Eventually, a stage may be reached at which the decisions necessary to keep the system running will be so complex that human beings will be incapable of making them intelligently. At that stage, the machines will be in effective control. People won't be able to just turn the machine off because they will be so dependent on them that turning them off would amount to suicide. That's Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber Manifesto. On the other side of that argument, we have someone like Kurzweil, who would argue that we can achieve immortality through the singularity, transhumanism. So my question is to you, what are your thoughts on singularity, positive, negative, transhumanism?
Good question. Nice. Yeah, good question.
Very good question.
Who's going to take it?
I think it ultimately comes down to if we're not autonomous in this sense, is it autonomy? I don't think is a necessity in terms of positivity. I think if it's being run in a good way where we are prevailing still and we are able to be creative, we are able to learn, we are, if it's for root good, then I think it's a great thing. We can focus our attention onto other things and not have to deal with the negative side of things. Obviously, if it's a negative, then I think it's bad. That'd be mine, so I think.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it's that whole sort of chess computer consciousness thing that if a computer can understand sorrow or feelings and have those different areas that they can understand, then they can make decisions based on that. But at the moment, we still have the upper hand. And it's actually that crossover, so if they start to become intelligent in that way. Yeah, it's really tricky. I don't have the answer. If I would, I'd get the Nobel Peace Prize. What?
Well, it sounds like a bad script from a Hollywood movie. And yeah, but I totally agree. I'm a nostalgic from the Middle Age anyway, so totally agree.
Hi, I have a question for Mark. Building off of the building off that the comment about how our work affects other people, I'm curious. In your proposed project, you are part of the experience, part of the work, part of the art, and I'm just curious what you're hoping to feel or experience, and also why 28 days.
Okay, I'll answer the 28 days, then I'll come to that. So it's 28 days because there was documentation which is now kind of discredited, but that after 3 weeks you lose old habits and develop a new habit. So in this assumption that personality is a habit, it was to test whether I will, a week excess of that loss of a habit and developing a new habit. And also, it tends to be 28 days that you test something for a short space of time to go for. In terms of the experience of the art and how that affects the viewer, was that question?
No, I'm more curious about what you, as the main experiencer of this piece, hope to feel or hope to achieve, or what you would, in an ideal scenario, happen.
The the premise of it was that if the sense of oneself a thing, and if I lose that self and develop this new self, which is the other person's self, whose identity does that exist as one, but then how that feels, I want to know. That's really what it comes down to. Can you lose your sense of self, develop a new self, and then through rehabilitation, come back to that self if that's possible? And it is to see, if there is an inherent personality or whether it's a cultural identity. I don't think that answered it, though, did it?
So are we, one more question, or are we?
Is there one more question out there? I think we're gonna, yeah.
We've got one.
Okay, this will be the last one.
This will be the last one, and then.
And we'll take afterwards a 10-minute break before.
Thanks. Again, a question about the virtual reality project. Why do this? Why subject yourself to this? To me, it seems a bit extreme.
It's a two-part answer. That one, this is the birth of this technology, virtual reality. And when you look at computers where they were 20 years ago to where they are now, and with the way the virtual reality, I can only assume, will develop, is that it will become such an intrinsic part in our life that, they're not commercially available yet. It's the buzz, and we're all talking about it, and they're coming out in June or whenever. So to act as a precursor to the possibilities of what the side effects are, long-term, short-term and long-term. And also, for me personally, it is about the identity and who I am, and whether there is that, who I am, whether it is actually me, or whether it's someone else, it's a construct of society.
Okay. So basically you're saying if your personality is malleable based on sight, sound, stimuli, over a period of 28 days, in anticipation of this future where everybody's sort of hooked up, connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's enough to validate, give you the validation of who you are. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, so thank you all very much, and thanks to everybody out here for being with us. But stick around for Luis's documentary as well as Bjork's film, and make sure to check the work out across the way. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And for those that want to stick around for Biophilia, we're going to take a 10-minute break. There's food outside and coffee.